Hey guys, and welcome back to the second part of Beyond Order 12 More Rules for Life. So today we are covering the other 6 rules, starting with number 7, work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. Number 8, try to make one room in your home as beautiful as possible. Number 9, if old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. Number 10, plan and work diligently to maintain romance in your relationship. Number 11, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. And lastly, number 12, be grateful in spite of your suffering. Now, if you enjoyed the first 6, then I know that you're definitely going to love these. We cover topics such as goals, values, beauty, morality, relationships, and much, much more. If you enjoy it, you know what to do. Hit that like button below and make sure you subscribe so you know when a new episode is released. Anyways, here are the next 6 rules to Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order. Okay, so 12 rules for life, 12 more rules for life, and this is the last 6 of those 12 more rules. Bloody hell.
Yes. Let me get them in front of me. So
yes.
Got number 7. I think the last one we did was abandon ideology, if I remember it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the next one is work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. This is dangerously similar to the other one, which was like aim at one thing, wasn't it? There's one story just covered, and it was like aim at one thing.
Yes.
It was something like that, wasn't it?
Imagine who you could be, and then aim single-mindedly
at that. Yeah. So
it's all about goals, really, in a sense.
Yeah. I think this kind of links back into, or his main point from this was linking back into like his idea of like hierarchies, and the whole point of focusing on one thing is you can't really be the master of every hierarchy because there's obviously different skill sets needed depending what the hierarchy is, whether it's, artistry, vs sports, there is some level of differentiation between the two. So this point is like, you can't be the master of every hierarchy, but you can be, the top of a few or one, let's just say, by finding something that, fits your capabilities. Or at least that's what I got, if I remember correctly, from the chapter.
I think a lot of this stuff about like the goal orientation, knowing how to achieve something, it relates to a lot of his rules whereby, clean your bedroom, or, only work on your house before you criticize the world, or, all these kinds of things. It's like, start small and then you can build out. So like, aim at one thing and, work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. Because I think a big thing is about the awareness of self-growth, that you can have a cause and effect on something, that you can do something and you can get a positive result out of it.
Yeah, like progress to a degree, isn't it?
Exactly. So I think a lot of it is about seeing that you can, if you put your mind to one thing at least, then you start to realize, okay, if I just start making omelets all the time, I can realize, okay, I'm starting to improve.
I can become the best omelet maker on the planet.
Omelet. But then you realize, actually, some of these skills, or like this ability of me just putting in effort, can improve on whatever I put my attention to. Yeah. So then you can start to, maybe you want to make a nice little scrambled eggs or something, whip that up, then you start improving.
You're weirdly, it's like a step to proving your competence to yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's like a way of building up evidence for your self-esteem to be able to, like, I think one of his main points as well is you can't really lie to yourself. Your conscience is always telling you, like, for example, if you're unworthy, it's probably got a body of evidence in its mind to prove that you're unworthy of something. So the whole point is you're building up this like database in your brain of evidence that you're a competent individual and you can make progress and you can change things in your life, that it snowballs into becoming a super competent person. I assume is like, this is like the idea, isn't it? It's like you said, you do the small things, you make your bed, or you do the small mini bits that sort of give you that sort of positive motivation and progress feeling, which then builds up this idea that, you can achieve things, or you can do things that you thought you couldn't.
Yeah, precisely. And I would say that, like, by doing these things, by accumulating these kind of experiences in growth, what you end up doing is you end up accumulating loads of experiences so that you can abstract the patterns that got you there. You know, the behavior that got you there. And the behavior there is like, oh, if I put in effort, then I could get a result.
Yeah.
You know, and so he kind of talks about that in terms of the apprentice and the master. And it's like, you're not able to learn these patterns or improve on a system until you learn the rules. You know, once you've learned all the rules, once you've accompanied all the rules, then you can realize, okay, well, what's the main pattern underneath these rules? What's the main reason for these rules? And then you can start to see the juxtaposition maybe between, you know, these rules when they were made and your current environment. And then you can be like, actually, this doesn't fit anymore because I know how the rule, like why it was made, but it's not meeting the moral standard in a sense. You know, and then you can start to recreate the system. And this kind of goes back to his first two rules in this book, the idea of, like, you know, changing tradition sometimes, you know, challenging it. But you can only really challenge it once you start to understand it.
And once you've kind of done it.
Yes, almost. Exactly. I don't think, like, one of the main points was like this idea of Christ being, you know, the person who follows the rules, but the person who knows when to break them the best, you know?
I thought it was quite interesting as well. He talked about the idea of the symbolism of the Christian cross. I don't know if you touched on this last time about being, like, the whole idea of the symbol of carrying the cross is carrying the burden and responsibility of, like, life, or the responsibility of actually doing something. Like, by acting, by making your bed, by, you know, single-mindedly pursuing something, you're taking on the burden of responsibility for achieving that particular thing you've set your mind to. And therefore, it is a burden and it requires a sacrifice, which I thought was interesting. I also got from this, he did mention, I think, as well, that the most stable positive emotion that a human can feel is actually this, like, the emotion linked to progress, or the emotion linked to pursuit of a valuable goal, which I thought was quite interesting, because it just goes to show as well in my mind why like video games are so particularly addictive, because they're like progress indicator hyper. I don't know how to explain it. They give you so many progress indicators that you always feel like you're achieving something. Therefore, you've got that positive emotion, like, consistently when you're playing a video game. In my head, maybe not all video games, but, like, good ones. It's like you kind of have your goals, which are constrained by the game, but you know what they are, and you always have these sort of indicators that you're going towards it, and therefore it's really easy to get in sort of that state of a positive flow / you know, motivation. It's what I find interesting is it's easier to get motivated by a video game than it probably is in real life to motivate yourself to do something.
Well, there's so much feedback, isn't there?
Which like, it goes to show, though, that there is something within a video game that leads to a more consistent motivational pattern than in real life, right? Like, I don't find it very hard to jump into a video game, and I never really get into a video game and go, I'm demotivated to achieve this goal right now.
Yeah.
Whereas in real life, you might feel demotivated. Whereas in a video game, you're always kind of like hyper motivated in a weird way. And that just goes to show the power of, like, if you can prove to yourself with progress, or at least, I don't know, take steps towards it, it gives you this, like, sort of positive motivation / emotional state, which Peterson always sort of talks about.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think what's interesting is that, like, in real life compared to video games, is that there's a time lag, you know, and so that almost means that you have to have some kind of hope, you know, that what you're doing is having a benefit. Because, for instance, you could go to the gym right now, but you're not going to see results straight away, right? You're just hoping that if I do this enough times, then I will start to see, you know, a change in the next 2-3 weeks, maybe month, you know. But it requires you to kind of trust that process and have hope in it. Whereas, like, obviously in video games, there's probably like a metric, whether that's like XP or something like that. You know that you're increasing even with the tiniest movement, you know, and that's why you're starting to get a lot of this kind of like.
Well, every action, I was going to say every action in a video game has a meaning. You get me? Like,
exactly.
Like an obvious meaning, right? Like you just said, you can go to the gym and you don't see the fruits of your labor for months, and it requires consistent effort.
Yeah.
Whereas a video game, like you said, every time, let's just say it was a shooter, every time you shoot a bullet and let's just say you kill somebody, maybe that's one of the games, you're getting XP, therefore you're always progressing.
Yeah.
So, everything you do has a meaning towards that larger goal, whereas in real life, it's hard to know what the meaning is because you have to sort of create it yourself.
Exactly. And that's why, you have to, I think it's, it can be trying if you are just starting out at something and you don't see that growth.
Yeah. I guess this is why, interestingly enough, they always say when in terms of trying to get habits, you've got to reconnect with your why.
Yeah.
Or reconnect with the deeper meaning of the action you're taking.
Yeah.
If you don't know the reason why you're doing something, you don't have the end goal / aim, you can't really achieve it because you don't have the motivation or you don't have the end state to look forward to.
Yeah.
To even bother doing the action in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is why almost all sales is just consistently giving somebody the, here's the future, what your future could be. Here's where you're at. My product helps you bridge the gap. And you can actually look at that for every single product, really. Even luxury goods is you could be this top status ape. And if you buy my good, it's going to take you from this, who's not people don't really respect you. But if you have my, whatever it is, my watch, my really expensive Rolex watch, now you can become this high status ape that everybody looks at. Yeah. And that's literally what it is. That's all sales is to a degree. Yeah. It's for example, as well, in the problem-based stuff, it's this is your problem, this is your current state, and you're struggling to do this particular activity. But if you trust us or you do this process, you're going to get here. And that's how PTs work.
Yeah.
Why did you go to the PT apart from that end goal of looking like a Greek god?
Yeah.
To a degree. Not everybody, but it's all training for a marathon. There always has to be a gap between, where you are and where you're going. And that's where the market for anything in my head comes into play.
Yeah.
I'm hungry. Okay, this is the market for all the food you can eat. And then obviously there's other things that can obviously impact it, such as taste or whatever and all that sort of thing. But it's the same premise. It's always telling you that there is a better place to be than the current place.
Yeah. And it's
bridging the gap.
It's kind of interesting because I think if you look at our society today, we're probably more impulsive, right? We probably need gratification now rather than later on. And so it kind of, hence why you're getting a lot of, for instance, with health, let's say, you get a lot of, for instance, you got the Aura Ring, or you got the Fitbit, things that measure it immediately. We need that feedback straight away. Rather than us just trusting in a process that consists of us, I don't know, going to the gym for a month and seeing whether it works.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not rocket science. People are do you want to just do the health fad, or do you want to actually just put in the hard work and go consistently to the gym for 6 weeks whilst also eating relatively healthy? But that's not sexy.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Putting in saying to you, oh, by the way, you've got to put in lots of work. You're going to have to blood, sweat and toil to achieve this. Or just saying, hey, how about you take my magic fat pill and you're going to be super ripped in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's the classic marketing angle. It's achieve result with zero effort.
But I guess that's why probably a lot of people have lost trust in that kind of thing, because people can end up abusing it in the end. Saying those exact things. What was that thing that used to be around when we were at school? It was Mike Chang's six-pack
shortcuts.
Yeah,
six-pack shortcuts.
Fucking hell, mate.
There's always been plenty of people to peddle you the... Because all it is tapping into the desire that already exists.
Yeah, exactly.
To be a high status ape who's ripped, who gets attracted or gets loads of people attracted to them, and then they just basically go to you. Oh, by the way, you don't have to put in all the effort like everybody says. Yeah. You're special. You can do it in a couple of weeks by taking my mass protein, whatever, or taking what those fucking electrical stimulation ab things. And just sit there and just
mate, ridiculous. I've never understood those, to be honest.
Yeah,
I never have. I don't.
But we've all got that streak in us that we want it to believe it's easier than it is, because nobody really wants to put in the effort. We are all relatively lazy to a degree. And obviously, if we could achieve the results without the effort, everybody's going to take that.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think it also takes a few times to be burned, in my opinion at least, by these shortcuts to then realise there isn't a shortcut and that you have to put in the graft, right?
Exactly.
So I personally think you have to have the burn of trying to try the shortcut, failing, and then realising, shit, okay, actually, I might have to do something. But also, there's never one strategy, for achieving the goal, right? There's multiple ways you could do each thing. So
yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think another interesting layer to this kind of chapter was this idea that you have all these kind of sub personalities that he talks about. these kind of like, you know, different traits. He talks about it from like a childhood perspective, whereby like children will acquire all these sub-personalities based on like loads of different contexts. And then what they need to do is acquire the ability to integrate them so that they know which ones to use or which ones to like, you know, emphasize in different kind of situations. And that's how they like climb a hierarchy, integrate with friends, have jobs, have a partner. And I think what he was trying to do was say that like when you choose a path, for example, all your attention is kind of going in one direction. And so it kind of merges all these sub-personalities and makes you really apply them in one proper direction. And so like you were just saying, like there are all these kind of shortcuts that come about, but it doesn't require you to actually change it all. It doesn't require you to like push them in a certain direction. You could like still have this like electronic ab person, but not change your diet, or like you could stay lazy. Do you know what I mean? The whole idea is to change the whole of you and push it towards something.
I was going to say the irony, or the thing that annoys me the most about this, when you kind of actually come to realize how it works, and actually it's a lot of effort. The thing that annoys me the most is when you get people who are already really like fit and like obviously have like a really well sculpted body because they've obviously put in years of work, who then peddle the goods, which they obviously never used to get there. And then I'm just like, you've just sold your soul to the devil, mate, because you haven't been honest with how you got there. I mean, fine, don't get me wrong. I think sometimes with a protein shake, it's like, I can understand why you would use it to supplement protein intake, right? But when they kind of always market it as like, this is the reason why. Yeah. It's like, no, the reason is because you lifted some bloody heavy weights for a long period of time and ate relatively healthy. Yeah. Like, who else are you kidding? Like, and it's always the same. Like, it'll be like the fit guys with like the electrical stimulation pack. And it's like, they never got their abs from doing that. Yeah. There is no way in my mind they got their abs from doing that. And it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's
I think that's crazy. So remarkable that like, I don't know, I guess they're presented with an opportunity and then they take the short road.
Yeah, on a weird side note, I was listening to the Robert Greene and Modern Chris Williamson podcast earlier, because I quite like Robert
It's a new one, isn't it?
Yeah, literally, I think it came out today.
Yeah.
But one of his things he talked about, he actually called this age the age of the con artist. And I thought it was quite interesting because now everybody's got their own voice and everybody believes in this idea of not survival of the fittest, but everybody's kind of lost. Everybody's really cynical, so therefore everybody's lying based off it because they're like, oh, well, everybody else is doing it. So I can just basically, you know, sell my soul and basically just like, not lie. It's like white lies half the time, right? Yeah. But still. And I find it really fascinating because it does fit into, if you actually look at a lot of these industries, like how they actually work is based off like optics rather than actual truth. And we're in an age of optics rather than like, you know, impressions or illusions rather than truth, because everybody's giving off the image rather than the actual substance behind it. Or you're basically paid for your image now. Like, and what's an influencer apart from a fake image that then promotes other products based on the image that they are not?
Exactly.
But yeah, sorry, we should probably move on to the next one because we're never gonna.
Okay.
So funny enough, this one kind of links. So try to make one room in your home as beautiful as possible. So that's number 8.
Yeah,
and that one is very similar in the sense of, I believe the reason behind this exact rule was if you take time to curate and make your one room in your house nice, it's something you can be proud of. I believe it was one of the reasons why he wanted it to be done right. It was like, it's something you can nurture and take care of, a bit like watering a garden. It shows that you can organize and keep things pristine. So it's similar back to what we were just saying about the progress thing, really.
Yeah, like I loved this chapter actually, because like I would say that the underlying kind of message here was the relationship that we have to beauty. So what I got from this was that, like, you know, beauty is basically chaos, right? It's something that's forever changing. It may not be like affecting us, but it's, you know, it's something that you can't capture, right?
Okay.
And the way we start to transform that is through art. So art is like half chaos, and it's an artist's opportunity to try and tame it so that we're able to see it. And then once we can see it, you end up getting science that tries to explain it. And then, I don't know, I guess you get economics or politics that tries to harness it, right? And he, like, a good example, which funnily enough, like I've always said about London, but he happened to mention about just cities in general, is that what you end up happening is an artist will go to a grungy area. They'll do something really cool that's really new. It will attract loads of people. And then you'll end up having loads of like young people that end up like going there. and then the money basically follows it, and then it gets gentrified. But once it's done that, it's not novel anymore. It's exactly. And so like the way that I see it for London is that it used to be Camden, then it moved to Shoreditch. Now it's
what is fashion but a changing standard of what is fashionable?
Exactly. And it's what I found interesting is he tried to relate to attention. So as we grow older, we basically try to simplify the world, right? Because there's just so much environmental stimuli. And so that's based on us trying to make the world so efficient. We block out so many things. We basically only focus on the one thing. But what we do is we obscure all the beauty. It's like when babies see things for the first time, it's amazing, right? It's incredible because they've never seen this thing before. But then you get used to it and you start to obscure it and block it out of your vision because it's not necessary anymore. It's not important. Yeah. And so I think he was trying to relate that to when we do this and we get older and we start to simplify the world, the beauty is still there. And so it can sometimes be frightening to try and see it from anew. And he talked about imprisoning art and trying to, stop change in a way because it can seem frightening. Which I just thought was a really interesting point.
I do actually remember there was definitely, he was talking about something along the lines of as you walk down the same street over time, you pay less attention to it and you rely more on your mental representation of what's there. So I look to the right of me now and I see a door and looking at it now, I can actually look at the details because I'm actually focusing on it. Whereas usually it's just a door and it's I don't even focus on it. When I'm walking through, I'll be thinking about something else in my head as I open it up. Right. And it's this idea of actually, taking a step back and looking at the door and be oh, actually, that's quite cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why he tries to explain this idea of make a room in your house as beautiful as possible so that you're constantly reminded of the potential of the world, of the reality of the world, rather than making the world what we want it to be. And because then you create this relationship with beauty and you're able to see that and kind of, once again, starting small, but then you can end up doing other rooms in your house and then you end up seeing it in nature and everything like that.
Yeah. It's training yourself to see more, basically.
Exactly. That's all I got for that one, actually.
No, that was more than I got.
I found
now that you reminded me about it, I do remember that being part of the points.
I just find it's quite interesting.
What's it? 7, 8. We're on number 9 then.
9.
So this one's a classic.
Yeah.
If old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. This links to his sort of self-authoring type activity he likes to promote. But it's the classic. It's almost like the fog thing again, but it's also one of the ones in the other book where it's articulate what's wrong. So basically try and get clear on your life, essentially, isn't it? It's look to your past, look what scares you, look at what you think is a traumatic experience and try and write out and articulate exactly what it is that you don't particularly like about it or that's upsetting you, right?
Yeah. But I don't think it's natural. You can't change your past. It's learning from your past. So it's going back over your past journey and seeing where things went wrong and then almost trying to judge them from a moral perspective and be well, why did this go wrong and what can I learn from it?
Yeah, how can I avoid it?
And once you kind of almost fix that path conceptually, then you can kind of figure out what direction you're going in. Or where you are now, where you've come from, and then you can try and figure out, where you.
I guess you can find out more of your formative experience as well. You might actually start realizing maybe this is why I sort of behave this way, or I feel this way about certain things is because of this one particular event.
And I guess you could relate it to Stoic journaling.
Okay.
The idea of reflection, because I guess sometimes if we're not present all the time, it's hard to realize if we're doing small things that are wrong, in a sense. It's only by looking retrospectively that we can sometimes be okay, this is a problem that I constantly do. This is why this is accumulated and this problem has happened. So I think it's, reflection allows you to see where you might have gone wrong, which you might not be able to see currently because it's incremental. It's tiny little things that happen over time, usually.
Yeah, and you can I guess if it's something that's upset you as well, you can end up realizing that's affected you for a long period of time. And if you haven't been able to articulate it and come up with a strategy, I guess, to avoid whatever it is in the future, you're bound to repeat the mistakes again.
Exactly, because in a way you're made aware of, I don't know, maybe the darker aspects of yourself, and this kind of ties into Jungian's, integrating the shadow, like we mentioned last time. Because you're made aware of those things, and then you can integrate it, be more full.
Well, I guess with the integration stuff, I always think is a bit of a buzzword, but I get what it's more like realizing your own bad streaks, I guess, isn't it? It's like just being aware that you're not the saint you think you are, sort of thing. That's the at least how I think of integration.
Yeah.
Like when you integrate the shadow, you it's more like realizing the dark side to yourself and realizing that you're just as much of a fallen angel as somebody else, and you're capable of the things that other bad people are capable of, and realizing that that's part of the nature, I guess. Okay, right. So we've got. I mean, I don't have anything else.
No, mate. It's
quite a short one, really.
Yeah.
And then sources. This is number 10. I think it is number 10, isn't it? Yeah. Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. I mean, it's in the rule itself, isn't it? So it's this idea, I guess, of finding. What's the word? Finding when you both contribute. What's the word? When you like accommodate you. I think it was trying to angle towards this idea of like finding or trying to find out what your partner likes and making sure you pay enough attention to what they like as well and appreciate the differences, kind of thing, and don't let the differences form a wedge in a relationship, and try and work towards, keeping that romantic spark alive. I don't remember, was it this book? But I remember reading somewhere about planning, like being that guy who organizes date nights every 2 weeks and just sticking to it.
He said that.
It was this one. Okay. And sort of sticking to a schedule where you have designated romantic couple time, because obviously life gets in the way.
I think a lot of it is rooted in communication, and I think he was trying to say, I related this a lot to the fog one, because the idea that once you know what you want, then whether you're not getting it or not, whether you're failing at getting it or not, and so then it's based in a relationship. You have to communicate that. Otherwise, the other person's going to be guessing in the dark, probably getting it wrong. You're going to get angry, and it's just going to manifest into other problems. So it's a lot about communication. And I think one of the points, on what you were saying that he was mentioning is that you need to constantly have time to communicate to one another. It sounds very arbitrary just saying you need an hour and a half a week, but he describes that if you don't communicate things that come up,
then it's going to get worse as well.
Then there's a backlog, and then next week you won't find time to do it, and then there'll be more and more, and then so by the time that you actually have time to talk about something, there's so much to talk about, and it's just
there's so much baggage,
and you're releasing,
going to respond aggressively,
so it's staying on top of
I guess it's funny, isn't it? Because you would assume couples therapy is essentially unraveling that baggage as accumulated over time, right? And basically getting it out in the open so people can deal with it, because it's all to do with communication.
Really. It's an appointment once a week for 2 hours or something. It's literally what he's talking about. What I found
it's fascinating is it doesn't have to get to that point, right? I guess is the point here. If you designate time. But yes, or go, mate.
No, I was just going to he mentions a lot about trust, and true trust, for example, is having courage, because there's a difference between just blindly trusting in anyone and people putting their trust in others, knowing that they can be betrayed, and that's kind of the sacrifice that needs to be taken in order to
remain sane, I guess, in a weird way.
Yes, and to develop any kind of relationship. He talks about romance, for example, and he's romance requires trust. And the more trust, the more someone puts, the more trust someone puts on you, the more responsibility you have. Because technically you're becoming more vulnerable. You're opening up to the other person. It's very easy to just not communicate what you want and stay hidden and trying to protect yourself the whole time, but then you never actually develop anything. And as this kind of progress of trust and responsibility occurs, you're more committed, and so you're more likely to overcome any fight. And he talks about like fights a lot in this chapter, whereby the reason why you fight should be to get to some peaceful solution, right? Okay, yeah. And that requires some negotiation. And there's couples handle it differently, whether someone cries and then or they fight and then there's anger and then there's crying, but then finally you get to some kind of agreement, but at least you got there,
but you also have to be truthful in the negotiation.
Exactly.
In the first place, and what you want, or be clear.
And if you don't have that deep embedded trust, then you don't have that commitment. And so I've talked about this a bunch of times, but if there's always that option of divorce there, for example, then it looks way more attractive if you're not actually committed. It's the optionality. Run away from the problems, I could just fall back on that.
Yeah, or I could just run away from my problems because there's a cop out rather than actually solving it.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, that's the other part that I got from it. Just this like kind of true trust that you have to have in someone else, and that allows you to develop everything else.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, that's it. All it.
That's all I got for that one.
Yeah. So rule 11 then.
Niels.
Do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. I mean, I can't really link this to the other ones apart from it's like he talks about it as being the sort of not really the exact evil triad, but it is like an evil triad of emotional sort of states, isn't it?
Yeah.
He obviously bases a lot of his ideas on the sort of biblical story, and all these are seen as, I guess, sinful in a way. But I guess you could almost argue some of his other points, but like ideology, you could definitely argue it's to do with arrogance, like the idea that you know what's best or what's true and nobody else can. You're like the sole ownership of what's true and other people don't know what's true. I mean, that's linked to arrogance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Resentment in itself is a bit like the fog stuff. So if you get stuff building up in the fog or not communicating relationship, you're going to build up resentment because they are not acting in a way that you want them to act, or they're not giving you something that you want them to give you, or like your needs aren't being met, and therefore you build up a sort of a catalogue of resentment, I guess you could call it. And I guess with the deceitfulness, that's a bit like breaking people's trust. Back to what you said, it's obviously not a good thing to do if you're, somebody's trusted in you and you're using it as a weapon or using it for your own benefit.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I don't know what you got from the chapter at all.
Well, yeah, I think from these three things, arrogance,
deceitful, and resentfulness.
Yes, they build on each other. If you let one survive, it's going to seep into the other one, and it's going to increase that. And I think really the kind of pattern I'm starting to see with this is that if you're not honest, if you don't try and do what you want to do, or be honest to yourself, and once again, starting small, starting from internal outwards, then you're not really going to be able to communicate. You're not going to be calibrated. There's always going to be a disparity. You're always going to need lies to get past because you're not being honest, and that creates resentment. It's because you're not explaining, you're not communicating to anyone.
Because you feel like you're not understood, I guess. Exactly. Like resentfulness comes from feeling like you're alone almost, and therefore somebody else is happy because you're not deep down happy because you don't know the truth.
Yes.
Therefore you get resentful of people who are happy, which leads to using lies, which leads to arrogance, I guess. Or I don't think it follows that pattern, but they all, like you said, they're all
interlinked. And I think a lot of the things that he talks about in this book, more so than the other one, is like love, courage, and like hope. And I think it's hard to have them if you don't have them. Like, how do you start off with it if you don't have it? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's like the kind of the hope aspect. And it kind of, I relate this to shattered assumptions, whereby pretty much all of those three assumptions, believing that the world is good and believing that everyone's nice, is hope that that's actually the situation. Right. Because if you don't have that, you can't navigate the world. You have to have something. Otherwise, like, you're no better off, really. Like, just, And I think if you don't try to acquire these three things, then those things are going to manifest. The arrogance, the deceitfulness, the resentment, because they're just so intertwined. And
I think that's quite interesting. That went pretty deep if you try and think about it. Like, without hope that the world is good, without hope that we can become better than our natures, what else do we have? Because if we all lead down to this idea of like, if we live out our nature in terms of like the aggressive side and stuff like that, like I guess like the devil-based side in like religion, like where does that lead us? It doesn't lead us anywhere near the land of God, should we say? But I mean, that's like a bad, like that's something that put people off. But it's not. It's like it's a metaphor for like having hope that we're better than we are, that we can be better than we are. Maybe is the best way of putting it.
Actually, yeah, I think like something.
Do you get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, it's something I've like off the back of that I think, how he talks about like kind of a collective attitude, like a moral based society, right?
Yeah.
The reason why we should seek that so much is because to have hope, love, and trust and all these other things requires an element of vulnerability. Right, you have to be vulnerable to a degree, because then that allows you to hope. Then that allows you to actually build something off that, build progress, build ambition, build relationships with others. Right, but you have to have some kind of. You have to be willing to be vulnerable and hope that people aren't going to take advantage of you.
Yeah,
and so that requires a society that won't take advantage of you. And that requires a society that is moral, right?
Well, that's what tells the truth. Like, and this is back to what we're talking about with the people who lie about, how they got ripped and stuff. And this is what I mean. If I take on the approach that, he's just lied to me, therefore it can justify me lying because these guys have been, and then it just perpetuates a cycle of narcissism, lying, resentfulness based on, he's only got that because he's lying, like he doesn't deserve it, and all that type of thing. And that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and
I wonder how that all. Society writ large, I wonder how that ends up, apart from anarchy and totalitarianism.
But this is it, and it requires some person or something to just stop the cycle going down. But yeah, I think actually that's quite interesting. I just found the vulnerability somewhat interesting because it's like an individual.
Well, and vulnerability is also like almost the opposite to narcissism to a degree, because you're admitting that you're not perfect and that you've got mistakes. Because narcissism, in a weird way, is like you're you don't have any mistakes. You're perfect. You're the best thing ever since sliced bread. You're like nothing. Like they're the people that have most fragile egos, right? And that is the opposite in my head of vulnerability, because vulnerability is the courage to admit your downfalls.
Yeah.
And if we all operate from the idea that we're fallen angels trying to go to heaven in a weird metaphorical way rather than religious way, but if you took it as a weird, like that's what we're all fallen angels. We're all trying to aim for like good. Rather than evil, then that is the moral code, I guess, in a weird way. Although it's hard to define good and evil depending on you think of it. But it's interesting to think of it like that because
if someone takes
it's very easy in my head. It's very easy to default to evil, like the traits of evil. Sorry, it's much easier to put your head in the sand and become narcissistic and egotistical than face the truth. Like having the courage to face your vulnerability and the truth, right?
Yeah.
And we are a society writ large who's failing to ask the questions, failing to see the truth, or trying to establish truth in the sense we just like to comfort ourselves with white lies / society, like if you look at a lot of the problems at the moment, it's all about like upholding a specific worldview rather than having a debate and open challenge of it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to think about where that leads.
Well, exactly.
But it all does fall back to this like moral problem, that way of framing it in my head.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if there is this element of, it's very easy to be selfish. It's very easy to like cheat.
I don't think it takes. I think that's almost the default state.
That's why I think that's the default, and so that's why the apprehension to open up or be vulnerable, because if someone takes advantage of you, then you're going to double down.
It's game theory, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's tit for tat in a sense, and
it is.
But then now we're seeing, now we can see systems that become corrupt, and how has that occurred? Well, it's because of this downward spiral where someone's taken advantage from the top or something, and then people don't want to open up, or people don't want to stand strong because it requires more.
Yeah.
It's difficult, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, didn't think of that before. That's a good little point there. But,
Yeah.
And then I guess number 12, mate. So we're on to the last. Be grateful in spite of your suffering. I mean, this one's in a sense, I guess it's pretty self-explanatory. It's this idea. Well, Peterson does believe that, similar to Nietzsche, I think it's like that life is inherently suffering to a degree. Like we can't avoid the fact that, like I said earlier, in terms of the cells, you have your current state, and you're always going to have a state or a goal where you want to be, which isn't where you are.
Yeah.
So therefore, state is always your whole life is always a state of transformation, going from what you could see as insufferable present, depending obviously how bad it is, to the place which is better. Like that's literally how our mind works. So obviously we wouldn't act unless we had a place which was better to go to. So this idea of, even though you can be suffering, it's being grateful for what you do have, and using a slider such as like this is where I'm at compared to some other people on the planet who are obviously struggling for food and water. So although I'm in this state now where my life's falling to bits, at least I have some of these things that others don't.
Yeah.
And that is the crux of that for me.
Yeah.
I wonder if you got anything else.
Yeah, no, I there was a good point that he mentioned in this chapter about grief, because he was trying to he was basically trying to argue against a nihilistic attitude. What's the point of living if life is so terrible, right? There has to be a reason for suffering. And I just found it quite interesting that, even when people die, we even people that we aren't necessarily close to, we still grieve in some kind of manner. And it's not like a choice, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to choose to grieve this person. It's your body's reaction. And which, I don't know, it's kind of like a poetic perspective, but it's almost like your body is saying that there is a value to life. There is a reason for me grieving. There is such thing as love for someone else, in a sense, which is very, poetic. But I just thought it was quite interesting, because it's it's almost a biological reason for living, in a sense,
Okay, yeah, giving you a deep-seated or proof that there is a reason to.
Yeah, which I just thought was quite a nice kind of, I don't know, I've never heard
I never considered that before.
And which basically is off the back of that, right? It's the idea that if Nietzsche's idea, there has to be some kind of reason for suffering, and if grief is something that we feel when anyone dies, well, then grief is the opposite to grief is love, basically, in a sense. What was it that he said? Grief must be a reflection of love. So it's almost love is a strong enough reason to suffer. It's a strong enough reason to live. Which I just thought was quite nice.
That is quite nice.
I want to read more into Nietzsche, just because it just seems like quite a daunting topic whenever I come across it. It's I don't know why, but it just is this dark, doom felt thing that I'm quite apprehensive.
We did do the short introduction.
Yeah.
There was a tiny bit on Nietzsche in that book, right?
Exactly.
But it's not the same as obviously reading some of his other stuff.
Yeah.
I've actually got the very short intro to Nietzsche somewhere. I can send it to you if you want.
Yeah. It'd be good.
I think. So yeah, is that you done? Because I was going to say I've got some other notes I kind of wanted to touch on.
Yeah, go on.
I've got here. So these are off the rules, only because there's one here that I saw. Okay, we go. So back to sort of this idea of good and evil, because I'm quite intrigued by it now.
Yeah.
It's the idea of being truthful, courageous, believing in the better nature, even though the default could be potentially the more negative traits. He talked about this idea as the devil as a motivational pattern who works against your positive intent. I don't know if you remember that bit. So it's a motivational pattern that basically blocks you from all you could be.
Yeah.
So the devil is the adversary, right?
Yeah.
As that's the definition, right? Or what the where the word is derived from or something, right? So he talks about this idea of the good intentions are brought to you by your conscience.
Yeah.
And the devil is always subversing or being subvertive towards your intentions.
Yeah.
And that is the symbolic representation of every human's life. It's the deep-seated, good, conscious, telling you what should be the case, what's true, what's not, and the devil as a motivational pattern that jeopardizes it and rationalizes itself and basically says, you this is what you should believe, like you are the best, all this sort of stuff. And that's like a devil-based motivational pattern. And then the conscience is the higher good that permeates through you, which I thought was a really interesting way of thinking of the religious sort of good and evil debate with God. Like, rather than seeing it as truth, as scientific truth, seeing it as a symbolic representation of what it's like to live as a human being.
Yeah.
You are constantly wanting to be better than you are, and the devil, which is the motivational pattern of yourself, which is deeply ingrained in you, it inhibits / stops you from doing it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would say that, like, the more you indulge in that pattern, the more prominent it is, right?
Yeah, I would have thought so, yeah.
So it's kind of just, like, the more that you're congruent with your conscience, the easier it is to act in that manner. And I feel like, if that devil pattern is somewhat like, let's say, survivability, selfish gain in a sense, right? Like, selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's almost like you reduce the requirements for that.
Okay.
The more you work in line with your conscience. Your conscience.
Oh, okay. Like, sorry, yeah, I get you. Yeah, I actually get what you mean.
Yeah. So you don't have to act in that selfish manner as often anymore.
It's almost like, the person who lives with their high conscience, they just seem like back to like the wavelengths of brains. They always say like somebody who's like vibrating at a higher level of consciousness. Yeah. I wonder whether it's this idea of like, when you live in that way that, everything sort of flows, they come across as happy, like achieving things, successful. And therefore the person who like always is being selfish, like the devil, the motivational passion that's more devil-like, let's just say, is always resentful. And like basically he thinks of himself as the ultimate judge, and that's the arrogant side of the devil. Like, he's like, he doesn't deserve happiness. Why is he so happy? He's a fake. He's a fraud. Yeah. And basically, once again, it's back to the arrogance of believing everything you think in your head because of the fact that you can't know everything and you don't know his story at all. You've just projected onto him your inner desires, or your inner, you project onto him your shadow. You want the things he has, but you can't get there because you've jeopardized yourself.
Yeah. Exactly, and then you resort to this like choosing of you, as in you must be the one to like benefit in any kind of situation, whether that's social or anything like that. But that's what I kind of mean with the selfish aspect, because realistically, it's what food, shelter, and a place to live. And then, over time, we've kind of increased those, and it's like, now I have to be someone that wins in a conversation, or now I have to, be the first to,
Well, yeah.
Do you get what I mean? There's like smaller requirements for it, but you're kind of working back down in a sense. If that makes sense, it's hard to describe, but you're basically reducing the requirements for selfishness in a sense.
So are you saying you get more selfish, as you go down towards the needs? Like, because the way what you were saying then, it sounded a lot like the needs, like the Maslow's hierarchy, almost like, you want the shelter, you want the food, you want...
In a sense, yeah. The more you act in accordance with your conscience, the less almost the lower you go down the Maslow's hierarchy in requirement of, acting in a selfish manner. Do you get what I mean? It's quite hard. I've only just thought about this now, so I'm kind of thinking off the top of my head. But
no. I'm just trying to get my head around it. So the lower you go down, the more primal it is, the more likely you are to be selfish. Is that what you're saying? So
the less like okay. So like you would just explain just now, right? You've got two ways of thinking. Okay, you've got the conscience, which is the higher order. Okay, and then you've got the patterns of the devil. Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I know what you mean by that, but yes. Yeah.
So
it sounds crazy every time you say it. Like when I say it as well, it probably sounds just as crazy. But, it's like
the devil, and the devil represents selfishness.
Fine.
Right?
The self-jeopardizing patterns you have, the things that stop you from living in accordance with what you want.
Yes.
Maybe let's put it that way.
So you've got two choices, right? You can either act in accordance to your conscience or the other. And the more you act in accordance with your conscience, it's almost like you realize you don't have to be selfish in loads of different scenarios.
Okay.
Right? So it's like you're almost training yourself to be less selfish in a sense. And so
you realize you don't have to be selfish to get what you want, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah, I guess it's almost like a behavioral reinforcement. Like you realize, by acting this way, you feel better about yourself, but you almost gain respect from people because everybody knows it's easy to, like, let's just say it's like everybody knows it's easy that if they saw 50 quid on the floor, you pick it up and take it. Everybody knows that's easy. Yeah. People know what's hard. It's handing that in to, like, I still remember when I was actually a kid, this is funny. We found like a £20 note. And I remember my mum was like, let's take it in. And we took it in to give to the zoo person or like the person with the lost and found. They're like, oh, if nobody claims it, you can have it. But I still did the right thing. And I remember feeling really good about doing the right thing, as weird as that sounds. Yeah. And it's quite interesting how that is actually, in this day and age, like, you would respect it, right? If you saw it, there's respect. Yeah. Because it's hard. And if you saw somebody just picked up in their pocket, you don't respect it, do you? You wouldn't go, like, he's a loser or like they're a fraud. Yeah. You just be like, fair enough, he took it. But that doesn't take any level of respect. Yeah. And it's almost back to this idea of character. Yeah. Like, how, like, different things, different generations have almost had a different word for it. So, like, obviously there's this idea of walking in the eyes of God. But in another way, it's just an idea of self-respect and character and sticking to values. Yeah.
And I think you're right on the money with the self-respect, because by you doing that, it's not for anyone else, really. No one viewing you is going to come up and be like, oh, that was really good. It's literally just for you. And if you can act in accordance with your conscience just for yourself, in a sense, then you're already winning. You don't have to try and do everything for everyone else, because you're trying to do the best for yourself.
The more I think about it as well, the reason why the resentful people dislike it as well, they project onto their motivations. So, like, for example, if somebody who was like resentful in general saw that, they'd be like, oh, he's only doing that to look good. Yeah. And he's projecting onto his own selfish, like, motivational patterns, which he's trained over time, onto the problem.
I guess this is where, like, the problem of, like, evolutionary, like, altruism comes in, because then it's almost like a theory to disprove any kind of altruism, because they're always saying there's a motive behind it. But a motive,
they always saying the motive in itself could be self-respect.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be self-respect. Yeah, it could be like, well, essentially, then you could argue that self-respect is actually just a positive motivational state, or like a state where you feel better. Yeah, you know what I mean. So it's just it's like a pleasurable
happiness,
response. You're getting down to the like happiness. Yeah.
But I don't think they would see that as, like, a legit reason.
Of course not. I'm not even going to argue that it is exactly a legit reason, but it seems as if that self-respect exists and the higher conscience exists to, like, make you want to behave in a specific way that makes you feel good about yourself. Like, a self-respect is a motivation. Whether or not there's an evolutionary reason for it, I don't know. Whether or not that's just the human spirit or whatever coming through, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to claim I know the answer, but it's as if it acts as if it happens. And I just thought the motivational, like, the idea of the adversary being the devil, being like the sins are almost built into you. So rather than thinking of it as an actual symbolic, like, creature that exists, it's more in you, and it's always jeopardizing you. And can you do the harder thing? And I find it quite interesting because, Peterson talked about, like, he's like talking about the idea of depression, or some walking around the streets and you can see people visibly living in hell. Or, the people, like, living on the streets who they basically don't want to be, or they just feel like probably like a disappointment to themselves. They've got their shoulders hunched or they're looking down, right? And that's the idea, like, where the devil's, like, completely taken over you. He's completely jeopardized your own ability to achieve things or put things in order, as Peterson says, or deal with things in the fog. So basically, actually, the devil is just a motivational spirit within you that is jeopardizing you from doing the things you should do, and it leads you to feel depressed. Maybe let's just say that. I mean, that could be a complete oversimplification, but it kind of seems like that's the case, right? It builds up to the point where you're in living hell, but it's basically just yourself battling yourself. And that is why the story's always been told, because it's the good self with the bad self, which is right down the line of everybody.
And I think it's interesting. Like,
I don't know if it's probably is more complicated than that, but I find it quite interesting to think of it that way, because it's just like, wow, it's actually it can explain quite a lot.
Well, it almost seems like by acting in accordance with your conscience, you're increasing your possibilities. You're increasing your options, in a sense, right?
I think you increase your confidence, right? Which also then increases your your options, because people look at you like, that guy's a really confident guy.
Yeah, but
the reason why you're confident is because you're just building up evidence that you can do the things you say you're going to do, and you can overcome your self-restraints, which is exactly what the devil is restraining you. So a force that restrains you.
But there's also nothing to fall not fall back on, but as in like to regret or resent. Because if you're constantly acting the way that your conscience is telling you to act, then you put all your cards out on the table already, right? So you can only ever go forward. Whereas I feel like acting in a self-deprecating way, in a sense, makes you smaller. You know, it's almost a claustrophobic, and like we were talking about with the fog,
it definitely makes your confidence smaller, I think, yeah. But it makes you feel overwhelmed, it makes you feel anxious, I reckon. It's all these sort of things. It leads to all of them.
Yeah.
Because you can't, I guess you just build up a bad reputation with yourself where you can't do the things you say you're going to do. You're doing stuff wrong because you have that deep feeling that you're doing stuff wrong.
Yeah.
And that's never going to end up well for you, is it? If you do keep doing things that are wrong, because it's building up this level of self-respect that I can't do anything right, let's just say.
Yeah. But that's my point, as in, like, you know, by doing this, you're more likely to do it again next time because you can't. It's a bigger hurdle to get over next time.
Okay, yeah.
So you're kind of,
I guess that's what they say,
suffocating yourself.
The depths of hell, like you're taking small steps into it, right?
Yeah.
Or it's not like you go in all at once. It's like you slowly, and by the time you look up, it's like, oh shit, I'm quite far down.
Exactly. Which is interesting. Just different ways to see it, but. Yeah.
Once again, it's just a different way of seeing it. I find it fascinating to actually see something that you're like, you know, you've been brought up around religion, like good and evil, God, devil, and like you're starting to like delve into it in a completely different way. Like if you just frame it like as we said, as a motivation, like as the adversary of yourself in your own consciousness, like not anybody else's, just your own battle. It's like you're battling the devil within, which is just anything that stops you from doing what you should feel like you should do. So anytime you're scared, that's why it's all about, like, I guess with religion, like sort of the God, walking in the eyes of God or whatever, the steps of God is all about courage and hope and transformation, let's just say, as they always talk about, like, Peterson always talks about like this, like you're transforming, you're proving to yourself that you can go above your, you know, the adversary, let's just say, you can overcome. In fact, I reckon actually Maps a Meeting, like later on in the book, it must talk about that a lot. I still haven't finished it. I only got up to like the first chapter. I'm convinced it must go into it. That is something I need to revisit as well, because that could be quite a good talk as well between us, I think, at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
And I wouldn't even do that. I wouldn't even do that in one go. That would be a couple. That would be like
we're going to bring out a course. A course on Maps of Meaning. 10-part series. There we go.
That's it.
I just think, it's really interesting. All of this like self-transformation that he talks about. And my biggest like kind of revelation through this podcast, just the idea of like hope and courage to even allow you to transform, in a sense, right? You have to be somewhat vulnerable. But I thought that you
have to take the jump, the dive, because you're not going to get feedback immediately. You're going to have to take the hope that this, whatever you decide to do, will turn out in the positive way, I guess.
Exactly.
To a degree. But you're guided, I guess, by the good feelings of what your consciousness tells you is the good, right thing to do. Yeah. And as long as you don't betray that, you go in the right direction to a degree. Yeah.
And it's just helped if you're in a positive environment or a positive society, that kind of moral society thing. But
perfect, mate. Well, that was the Beyond Order 12 More Rules for Life.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. And there you have it, guys. All 12 rules of Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order. Now, if you liked it, do let us know by giving us a like, or preferably leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought, whether you agreed with him or not. We're always keen to hear your ideas, so don't be shy to share them. Now, I shouldn't have to tell you this, but please do hit that little subscribe button. We have some really good books lined up over the next couple of months, which I know you're going to love, so make sure you don't miss out. In other news, next week we will be covering a very short introduction to philosophy of science, followed by a book summary of Social Warming by Charles Arthur the week after. Now, if that piques your interest, make sure you tune in. But until then, guys, have a good one.